The 14th president of Eastern Kentucky University was once a student there, twice. David McFadden, a first-generation college student, is the first graduate of Colonel Country to lead the university. Renee Shaw talked with him yesterday about growing enrollment and sharing their story to success to decision makers in Washington and Frankfort.
President McFadden, thank you so much for dropping by.
It is so good to be with you, Renee.
We've been trying to do this for a couple of years, so I'm glad we get this time. I want to talk to you first just about the value proposition of higher ed. There's a lot of discussion happening in a lot of spaces, particularly in the Washington political circles, about what is a professional degree, what is the goal of higher education. How are you interpreting those conversations, and how are maybe you resetting for what you're hearing in Washington?
You know, Renee, for me, I'm a native Kentuckian. I'm a first-generation college student, and I'm the first alum from the region that we served as president of Eastern Kentucky University. I think that's such a powerful testament to the value of education. Without a degree, without that opportunity, it's just not possible. And so I think you make it very personal first, and then we can go student by student and life by life and have that conversation about the transformative power. But then I think we can transition to the economic mobility that it creates. And Georgetown does this study a couple times, and every other year or so. And what we see is that a college degree in the lifetime earnings of a student is worth nearly $1.5 million more in earnings. That is true economic mobility. It is personal power. It's economic power. And I think that we've just got to continue to position that the investment in higher education is one that has a tremendous return to our communities here in Kentucky, to our economy, to really how we make Kentucky better tomorrow than it is today. And so I think that there's a real opportunity to have that conversation. And I do believe a lot of our policymakers here in Kentucky, those who represent us in Washington, have a deep appreciation for our for our post-secondary institutions, public and private.
Right. And when you think about what the goal of higher education is to expand your mind and your understanding of the world, but it is also an economic development tool. Is the conversation too driven by what industry and business needs, do you think, at times?
Well, I think that we've got to be responsive, and so I think as we think about Kentucky and we lay out the pathway forward, and what's the future economic opportunities for our state, we've got to be really intentional about that. We think about Toyota Motor Manufacturing in 1987, and when all that happened, we've built a support system to really support manufacturing in this state, and EKU's proud to have the only manufacturing engineering program in the state and to be supporting that. But all of our institutions are doing that, and so I don't think we can be disconnected from where the economy is going, where the jobs are, because every student who walks across the stage at any one of our institutions should have the expectation that they're job ready, a career ready in that way. And so what that means is that they've honed those skills that are essential for them to be able to be successful in their careers. And in some cases, that's passing a licensure exam, like our nursing students. We've had a 100% pass rate for the last so many years of of our nursing program, but also those those critical communication skills, critical thinking, the ability to work in a team, and really to discern fact from fiction and what's going on in the world.
Yeah, let's talk about how many students are walking across that stage at EKU. Talk about let's go to the enrollment numbers. How big was your freshman class, and how does that stack up? And then talk about your matriculation and graduation rates.
Nearly 2,700 freshmen this year. That's really kind of where we've kind of been in this growth cycle since 2020. We tipped over 16,000 students for the first time this fall since 2017. So we've been on a growth cycle since 2021. Proud to be Kentucky's largest comprehensive university again for the first time in probably over 20 years.
And how is that metric determined?
Total enrollment. So CPE does their annual. So last year we kind of on the degree-seeking student side, we were the largest comprehensive. CPE will probably get those data out for this past year sometime in the next few weeks, and we'll see where things are at this year. But we've continued to see growth year over year. Our freshman class has continued to grow. We're growing in transfer students. So lots of excitement on campus. Lots of high demand programs that are really serving kind of the economic and growth opportunities for the state of Kentucky.
Well, let's talk about them. Aviation in particular, law enforcement program, criminal justice programs we know have been very successful and highly sought after. Talk about some of the standout programs at EKU.
I think aviation's one that gets a lot of attention. One of the fastest growing GDP areas for Kentucky: aerospace, aviation. We're at over 500 students in that program now. It has doubled in size in the last 6 years. So much demand for particularly our pro-flight students. We've heard a lot about the aging of the cockpit,
right,
the person,
right.
those pilots that are sitting there. So just such a high demand program in an area that's growing, not just here in the state, but really all across the U.S. And as we think about supply chain, you and I were just talking about, we're all getting deliveries at home,
right.
and the logistics of those things, just a big role for our students to play in that space. But again, when we think about our Kentucky communities, EKU is proud. We're #1 for per capita Kentucky enrollment. We're #1 for our graduates going back to work in Kentucky communities. I think that a lot of that is driven by the fact when we think about education, first responders, healthcare, engineering. We think about the major things that are foundational to
right.
every community. Those are the things that we've done best for a long time at EKU.
What does your online education offerings look like, and how robust has that been or becoming?
Yeah, 2006 was the first time we stepped into the online space, and I think we were probably the first public to really get in. And so we're now nearly 5,000 students online. Continues to be the fastest growing sector of higher education, not just at EKU, but really across the nation. And so excited about meeting students where they're at. And I do think there's an expectation for those who are working professionally, those who are looking for certain, certificates or certifications that they need. But also, we've got a lot of first-time, full-time freshmen who, are place-bound for one reason or another and are deciding to pursue their education online. So as the School of Opportunity, we want to meet them where they're at.
Right. Adult learners, or non-traditional students, as they're often called. What does that picture look like?
Yeah, I think for us, it is a significant number of individuals across the Commonwealth and who have some college, no degree. Maybe they tried college, it wasn't for them. They worked in a career for 20 years, and now they're thinking, hey, maybe I want to do something different. The economy has changed tremendously. When we think about the jobs of today and the jobs of when you and I graduated from college, it's changed tremendously. And so the reskilling and the retooling, I think meeting them where they're at, but the important thing is recognizing their experience. And so we've been really focused on competency-based education and credit for prior learning, trying to say, hey, if you work professionally, you hold these credentials, these industry credentials, we can acknowledge and recognize those for credit and try to accelerate the timeline to degree so that you can, pursue whatever's next for you.
Renee will have more with President McFadden about the new School of Osteopathic Medicine to come online in a few years, and his asks from Frankfort in the upcoming legislative session that begins in January. That's all right here on Kentucky Edition.
We continue part 2 of my conversation with Eastern Kentucky University President David McFadden, who says the Colonels are making great strides in providing a higher education to students in the region and beyond. We pick up the interview where I asked him about the hands-on training that the facility that they have is educating the next generation of professionals in several fields.
If we go back to 1906, all of our comprehensive universities in Kentucky, Eastern, Western, Murray, Moorhead, we were all founded as teachers' colleges, and all of us had lab schools. Those were effectively the laboratory by which we trained those educators. And over time, many of the institutions kind of transitioned away as we saw more student teaching taking place in the traditional public schools and other ways of delivering that education. But we've really held on to that at EKU. And so in some ways, it's almost been a restoration movement to have that laboratory space where we're training that next generation of teacher, school psychiatrist, school law enforcement. I mean, so it's really, when we think about schools and, kind of the connective tissue that schools are in every community, there are so many professions that find themselves working in and around a school. It's just a unique opportunity for us to have that laboratory setting to make sure that those graduates have been there, they've seen it, and they're ready to go out and transform it in a big way. I joke, I've got 3 kids who go there, but the school's not for those, P through 12 kids. They are the beneficiaries of it. It is for our post-secondary students who are using that lab to really be the best at what they do.
Yeah. Let's talk about the legislative session that is coming at us fast and furious. Dr. McFadden, as we speak, we're just really 2 or 3 weeks out from the start of the session, January 6th. What are the asks from EKU, and what maybe are you going to play some defense on?
Yeah, for us, College of Osteopathic Medicine, you know, we worked through this process for a couple of years. The legislature last year passed a pathway for schools like EKU to pursue post-baccalaureate degrees. So we will be moving forward with our Doctor of Osteopathic Medicine program. That program comes with a bond issuance that has some escrow requirements, and so we'll be working with the Commonwealth of Kentucky to help secure those funds as we go through the accreditation process. Like any good university president, we do have some building needs. We're looking at allied health, such a growth area for us. Over 4,000 of our students on campus are connected to the healthcare sector. We do a great job in that space. The EKU School of Nursing, as I said, year after year, 100% pass rate on the NCLEX. We just celebrated 60 years of serving Kentucky in healthcare, but we've been doing it in the same building for those 60 years. And so we're due to really build an integrated health innovation space. We want to bring all of our healthcare programs under one roof. It will create a simulation experience for our professionals that when they leave EKU, they will go into into that job setting better prepared to work with all of the other professionals who they're going to end up working with in that space. And so that's our big ask, is our healthcare innovation facility and our escrow for our med school. But really excited about that. Thankful to Speaker Mead, who has continued to help us and support us, and so many others who have been such a big support of that program up to this point.
When do you expect to have the first graduating class of the School of Osteopathic Medicine?
Well, with construction, we were just talking about the studio a little bit, and we're working on Model Lab. Construction is a little slow these days. I think best case scenario, our first incoming class would be the fall of 2030. They would graduate 2034. We may have a little give or take in that a year or so, but really we're geared up to look at that. And as I look across Kentucky, I'm a native of Johnson County. When 94% of our counties are underserved in primary care, when nearly half the counties in Kentucky have no pediatrician, when we think about women's health, we have so many healthcare deserts across this state. The reason we've continued to look at this program is trying to solve some of those big problems. And so we're eager to continue to move forward on that front, and excited to view this as a great investment for the Commonwealth and a solution to a big problem, but probably not something that's going to happen tomorrow.
Right, right. Hold on for that, right.
Yep.
Let's talk about the performance funding model for higher education and what that means for Eastern and the impact it's having. And is it working in your view? Or I know the answer, but maybe others may want to hear you say, how are comprehensive universities really faring from this new performance model structure?
For us, so 2017 was the first year that we stepped into this, and I was, I've been at EKU the whole time that we've navigated this. Unfortunately, through the first, 4 years effectively of the model, it was either cuts or no money. And so in some ways it was performance cutting for those early years. And then we've seen a significant investment in higher ed the last several years, and we're grateful to the legislature and for their investment in higher ed. I think as we've seen those dollars flow through the model, there's some things that probably need some attention. As we look at our institution, we've set record growth, record freshman classes, record retention rates. However, the distribution of funds in the model probably have not been, directly reflective of that success. And so I think if you talk to all the presidents, I think we all would say we have enough data now to start to making some informed decisions about how to shape this model in perhaps a more informed and more equitable way. I think we would also say that across the board, all of our institutions are looking for base resources. As we think about just the inflationary costs that come with operating, if we think about our own household, there is nothing cheaper today than it was a year ago, 2 years ago, 3 years ago. And so I think to continue to be competitive in the higher education space, and I really view our universities as economic engines and really job recruiters, the ability to import talent to the state. We're going to have to continue to make those investments. And so we're eager to continue to work with the Council on Post-Secondary Education, to work with the other institutions, but to shape the model in a bit more intentional way that is more reflective of the performance distributions. And so what I would say is, I think we're measuring the right things. I'm just not sure we're measuring them the right way.
Right. Let's talk about how you're engaging with the federal delegation in Washington, our Kentucky delegation. What are the needs that you're petitioning them to uphold for you?
Yeah, I think that, federal financial aid is one of the top things. Lots of conversation back in the summer about, who was going to be eligible, what Title IV funds were going to look like. Largely, we're not big changes in the undergraduate space to that, and so we're grateful for our Kentucky delegation. Lots of conversation with them. In fact, I'll be in D.C. next week with NCSL and working on a panel group. So we want to continue to make sure that those funds are out there and available because for our students, 50% of our students are Pell eligible. They're bringing Pell dollars to the table. 50% of our students are first-generation college students. We are serving the underserved in that way, and so we want to make sure there's maximum resources available to them. So that conversation with our federal delegation, critically important. We're continuing to engage in research activity and things that are really important for Kentucky. And so as we step into this medical school space, continuing to really look at those grant opportunities to try to do meaningful research that addresses issues that are really important to Kentucky.
A new state law ridding state colleges and universities of DEI, diversity, equity, and inclusion, positions and programs doesn't mean, for one institution, that they're abandoning their mission to serve underserved student populations. In the final installment of my interview with Eastern Kentucky University President David McFadden, we talk about that and possible legislation to ease the transfer of course credits. How has EKU had to pivot from that space, and how do you still serve the underrepresented populations as you mission to do?
I think as I talk about, so many first gen, so many students who are coming that are Pell eligible, our low income student population. I really have experienced and led by the notion that if you choose EKU, EKU chooses you. And so when it comes to student support services and student success, we have just doubled down on making sure that all students who are on our campus are getting the resources, the support, the education that they need to be successful. And so, as we've kind of navigated, those changes as they've been very explicit in House Bill 4 and a few other things, I think that's been, it's been in some ways reassuring to us that as we think about serving all students, that we take a lot of pride in the fact that we feel like we were doing it really well. And so as we talk to our students and engage with them, I think that my feel is that our students feel supported. They feel like that campus is a place that they feel engaged. Just finished up a survey that was part of House Bill 4 that come out, and I think that early preliminary results show that students feel like that they have the opportunity to express themselves and that they feel welcome on their campus, and that EKU's their second home or in some case their first home. And so we're proud of that and eager to continue to move forward and serve students and meet them where they're at.
Finally, just yesterday, I believe it was, in Frankfort, Representative Vanessa Grossell, who serves the Lexington and Fayette County, Scott County area, is expected to file legislation, and she talked about this bill in committee to make it easier for college students to transfer course credits between Kentucky's public universities, which many would say, I thought they already did that. It's called the Post-Secondary Credit Alignment Plan. Why is that even needed? Isn't that already happening, and what could be done better?
Yeah, I think for us, and I think we're engaged in this conversation right now with the council, with Representative Grossell, excited to really better understand kind of some of the things that she's trying to accomplish, perhaps be able to share some data that shows where we've made some strides. And I would say this, having been a part of this for now over 15 years, we are so much better today in that credit articulation and making sure that those credits are going toward the degree requirement than ever before. Advising has got so much better, but I do think we still have the instances where a student thought they wanted to be a healthcare professional and then said, hey, maybe I want to be an architect. And sometimes that just comes with, some opportunity costs, we'll call it, in that experience. But I would largely say that for us, we're Kentucky's #1 transfer institution. We transfer more credit from KCTCS than any other institution. I think we're doing a lot of good work in that space. Could we get better? I would say we absolutely could. We're looking forward to working with Representative Grossell to better kind of refine, where those key areas are that we feel like that there's some stumbling blocks for students. Continue to identify those, eliminate those roadblocks, and help students, navigate that transfer in the most seamless way. But I will say that, I commend, President Quarles. I think he's got agreements with every one of our institutions. We're doing joint advising with those students. I think the key is whether they're in high school or whether they're at community college or whether they're going from 4-year to 4-year, the advising is so important. And so just being intentional about, making sure students know that they know exactly where they want to get to and laying out that pathway is important. So eager to engage with Representative Grossell to better understand that. But I will say, I do think if we look at the data, we've gotten tremendously better at transfer credit. There's always the opportunity to get better each and every day, and we're committed to doing that.
You can see other segments online at ket.org/Kentucky Edition.